Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. May yoga practices free you from the past, embrace unconditional love for yourself and others, and align you with your authentic self. My guest this week on Vox Novus, Molly Chanson, is a writer, teacher, and yoga instructor who shares the physical and ethical practices of yoga as a way to heal, overcome difficulty, and live a fulfilled life. Molly holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree from the University of Illinois at Chicago. In 2019, Molly completed her 200-hour yoga teacher training at Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health and continues to train toward her 500-hour certification. Molly is founder of The Practice, an online yoga membership that offers yoga, writing, and spiritual teachings based on the philosophies of yoga as a path for resilience, healing, and transformation. Her website is mollychanson.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and new book, Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Molly Chanson. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Molly, please share with our listeners your path and how you embrace the practice of yoga in your life.
I started doing yoga when I was 15, and my mom had done yoga her whole life, and she started teaching me some poses in our living room. So that was my introduction to yoga. She was my first teacher. And there weren't studios, or it wasn't the practice that we see today, but I kept doing yoga. I really enjoyed it. And then I let it go for a while. I got married and had kids and babies, and the practice kind of fell to the background because there were other things happening in my life. When I was in my late 30s, I started doing yoga again. I really felt like everything was I was losing myself. I was married, I had my kids, I had my career, but I was unsettled. I was unhappy or discontent and probably depressed and anxious and all those things that can happen in our lives. So despite everything kind of being put together in its place, like I had followed this life path that I thought would fulfill me and sustain me, and that wasn't happening. And so I started doing yoga again, really as a form of exercise and just kind of to calm down, knowing that I had done it before and it was a mind-body practice, and I thought that might help. And when I did that and started back up again with a regular yoga practice, I really became aware of how busy my mind was, and not just busy, but how negative it was. I had a really critical voice that I became aware of, and I thought, this is odd, and this can't be healthy, and kind of what's going on. So I just kept showing up to yoga and to my mat, and it was a place where I was experiencing myself and my emotions, not just the body, but other parts of myself. And so this is when yoga became a spiritual practice for me, and I started realizing that it was more than a form of exercise, and even more than a way to sort of calm down, but there was something else happening. So that's when I really dove into training and study and became a yoga instructor and a writer, and all that stuff came with that.
And you trained at Kripalu in Massachusetts. I've had the pleasure of visiting that beautiful facility. What was your experience like at Kripalu?
Yes, Kripalu. So interestingly, my mom gave me a catalog from Kripalu when I was in high school, and she always wanted to go there and always talked about it. And the first time I went to Kripalu, I was 40 years old. And I had always dragged that catalog around with me, always kind of hoping I would make it there because I live in Wisconsin. So when I finally stepped foot at Kripalu for the first time, I was there for a month to do my 200-hour yoga teacher training. And, I describe Kripalu as a place that it's like a constant walking meditation. I mean, everything there is intentional, everything there is sacred, from the meals they serve to the rooms that you stay in, the grounds, of course, the instruction and the classes. And it's just this living space that embodies all 8 limbs of yoga, the yamas, the niyamas. There's permission, there's choice, there's different levels of classes, there's space to be, there's cleanliness. It was exactly what I thought, but, also different and probably a little more than I expected.
Did you find it to be also a healing experience for you?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Many of our listeners practice different forms of yoga. Please share your understanding of yoga.
My understanding of yoga really comes from the sutras and Patanjali's 8 limbs. So yoga to me is as much an ethical practice as it is a physical body and breath practice. And because I am trained in Kripalu yoga, and that's my foundation and my training, that means I practice compassionate yoga. So for me, yoga is a practice where we listen to our bodies, we listen to our hearts, we practice self-observation without judgment, which is what Swami Kripalu, that Kripalu is named for, always said. And so this is my idea of yoga, is a loving, compassionate practice for ourselves and for the world.
And that active compassion, as you said, is for the self also.
For the self also, yes, yes. And I think when we heal ourselves, we heal all our relationships and everything around us.
And especially the relationship with ourselves.
Yes.
I found anyway.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
It starts there. And I think that we have trouble with this healing ourselves because we think of it as being selfish or indulgent. For me, my experience as a woman has been to really serve others and be there for others, like family and children and even in career. And but it starts with us. It starts with healing ourselves so that we're able to give to others how we want to.
And for many of us, that's the hardest lesson to learn, isn't it?
It very much is, yes.
I remember growing up as a child, my father became ill when I was 8 years old, and I became part of his caretaking team with my mother. And for the first time in my life, I felt that he loved me. And it wired in my young mind that if you take care of others, you will be loved, which set a pattern for me in life, which I had to work on very hard in my 40s and 50s to change.
Yes, yes. That all makes sense. Yes.
Now, your first book was entitled Fallen Star, A Return to Self Through the 8 Limbs of Yoga. What inspired this book? And please go more into the 8 limbs of yoga.
Sure. So I started writing Fallen Star before I knew it was going to be a book. I was writing as a way to make sense of my experience. I was getting divorced. I was getting sober. And I really felt like my life was falling apart. So I started writing as a way to make sense of that and cope with that. And at the same time, I was doing my yoga practice. So the writing and the yoga were happening at the same time on my path to healing and overcoming these experiences. And I started to notice how yoga was tied in with the 8 limbs. And this was the first time I learned about the 8 limbs. So I started reading books and learning about Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. So the 8 limbs are a path to enlightenment, but honestly, I like to say a path to contentment or a path to an easeful life. Enlightenment might sound a little daunting to some. So the 8 limbs of yoga include asana, which is the physical practice, but there's 8 total, so that's just one of them. So they have The 8 limbs are the yamas and niyamas, which are ethical practices and observances. And then there's asana and pranayama, which is the physical poses and the breath. Pratyahara is presence. Dharana is focus. Dhyana is meditation. And samadhi is the 8th limb, which is enlightenment.
In my personal experience, embracing yoga in my early 40s launched a series of life-changing and enhancing synchronicities. Have you found that following the path of yoga opens one to synchronicity?
Absolutely. When we become more aware, we are noticing more. So yoga draws us, we create this state of awareness on the body and with the breath, and it draws us in. And always in life, obviously, we're drawn outward into relationships and people and jobs and stimulation, and our senses are really focused on what's happening around us and in the outside world. So a yoga practice, when we're practicing the postures and looking at the breath and we're on our mat, we're drawn inside. And as we're doing this, we're increasing prana. So in yoga, prana is the breath. It's also the life force and this energy that's coming from within. So when we're practicing yoga, we're cultivating prana, we're raising that energy from within us. And in doing that, we enhance our creative abilities, we increase our intuition, we're able to notice our gut more and our instinct. And so when we become more aware of ourselves with an inner focus instead of an external focus, we're able to witness synchronicities and we're able to witness miracles. And these things are always happening, but when we're so focused on the external and everything outside of us, it's harder to see all that. So yes, I think a yoga practice welcomes in a deeper awareness of synchronicity, and then we're able to follow that energy.
It's funny that the path that I started in my late 30s and early 40s, once I said yes to the path, another synchronicity would come and another opportunity would come. And in each opportunity, I saw three choices. I could either dismiss it out of hand, say, yes, that's interesting, but not right now, perhaps later. Or I could say yes with a big capital Y and embrace it immediately. And then the next yes would come and the next yes would come. Did you find the same thing?
Yes. So one thing comes and we, like you say, we might make the choice to follow that energy. Or I love that you have three options, because a lot of times we live in two of like, it's yes or it's no. And there's infinite options always, but to have that third one of maybe it's just not right now is great. And yes, as soon as we follow one path, we're brought to the next one and the next one. And life just keeps opening. For me, that same thing has happened with my books, with my teaching, with other things in motherhood, relationships, like everything just kind of, I'm open. You're more open to what's arriving instead of too focused on how you want things to be. And therefore you kind of eliminate those other possibilities that might be there.
And the other thing that's interesting to me personally is that my path, as I said, began in my late 30s, early 40s. And you also started in that same age group, right? Do a lot of people do
Yes.
that?
Yes. When I was 38 when this started happening to me. And I do think there's this time in our lives where that's not uncommon. I think when I was younger, maybe I just wasn't open or able to embrace yoga as a path of healing or a path towards enlightenment. And so I hear that from a lot of people. And I had a colleague at the time. She was a business partner of mine, and we didn't have a yoga relationship. But during this time, I learned that she had a spiritual practice. And she said, oh, 38 this is your year of awakening. This is the age that we go through this spiritual transformation. So you're right on track. And it made me feel a little better about everything that was happening.
Absolutely. We have a lot of listeners who are in that age group in their late 30s, early 40s, many women. What advice would you give them about embracing another path?
Oh, I think embrace it. Try to embrace it. Try to accept it. I think that sometimes when at that age, we can have, I at least had this idea of what my life should look like, again, focused on the external. And when bumps come along or things come up that we don't expect or that we don't want to be happening, it's really easy to think that everything's going wrong or that we're doing something wrong or that we have done something wrong. And this is a punishment that is coming to us because of our actions. And this is where the healing of the self really comes in to help us and transform us. So when things are happening that are not as you expected, or they're bad things or tragic things or losses that are coming in, to kind of shift your perspective and look at that as like, this might be leading me in a different direction. And I don't know why or the outcome, but I'm going to work on accepting that this is happening, and that it probably, I believe, is leading you to a new place that is better than what you expected originally.
Trust that inner voice.
Yes.
What inspired your new book, Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life?
Yoga Wise is a culmination of the last 7 years of my writing, my personal experience in life as a wife, mother, woman, and it's also obviously my study of yoga philosophy. So it's really a product of my experience and my practices along the way, not only yoga, but also my recovery practices, my knowledge of therapy and things that I did, my writing practice, all of this kind of came together to create Yoga Wise. And I also believe that in addition to me doing the work and the writing and bringing it all together in a way that's accessible to everybody, it also was divinely inspired. Talking about synchronicities, I was given a lot of space and time in a unique way so that I had time to write the book, despite everything else going on in my life. And I was given a lot of internal guidance. Writing became a really spiritual practice. And I know that it wasn't just me doing all of that.
Absolutely. Do you ever have the sense when you're writing, especially spiritual work, that you're being inspired, that it's actually coming through you rather than from you?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
And
a sense of channeling almost, right?
way. It's yes. Well, it's I I haven't called it that, but it is that. I mean, I think that when that happens, it might be hard for some of us to admit, because it feels a little freaky or something. But yes, when I was writing Yoga Wise, it really I was in a different state of awareness than if it was just me thinking I'm going to write this book.
How would you describe your connection to spirit, to the one that you see that as the one?
I think it is a lot from my heart space. So that connection for me happens in a very, it starts with my body, it starts in my body and in my heart. And so when I experience that inner voice or sensations from my heart space, when I experience the breath, that helps me, those physical things help me to connect to my higher self and my idea of a higher power or something greater than me around me. So I think it's a little bit of both for me. I think that there's this higher self inside of us, but that's also that greater thing around us.
In Yoga Wise, you organize the daily practices into chapters based upon yoga philosophy, psychology, and recovery. Please share with us a little of each of these aspects.
So I have many tools that I have picked up along the way in my healing journey, many tools in my toolkit now. And each of these has great value to me. And that's why they are all in the book. They all played a very big role and still do in how I overcame difficult situations and how I live my life today. And they're all still part of my life today. So the therapy was really big for me when I was going through divorce, going through addiction and recovery, and even just going through relationships. So I learned I had never had a therapist or professional help like that prior to being 38 years old. And I learned a lot about communication and relationships and just aspects of that from a psychology perspective. And that was very helpful. Of course, my yoga practice was monumental in my healing and is part of my life today in terms of practicing self-compassion and practicing service and observing the body and tuning into intuition, and having that practice with myself and therefore with the greatness around me. And then recovery, I use the 12 steps in my recovery, and there's also a fellowship in recovery. And so all of these things, the great thing that I think came, and one of the motivations for writing Yoga Wise was that as I was using all these tools and doing all these things in order to heal, they all have a lot in common. So the 8 limbs of yoga and the 12 steps of recovery have a lot of similarities, and they might be in a different order or they might be called something different, but the practice is the same. So I really found that to be fascinating, and that's why my book is organized that way.
And the subtitle is 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Please explain to our listeners what each of those represent.
The 365 days are organized according to the 12 months. So it's 365 days of teachings. Each day each day is one reading, one page. So it's short, a few paragraphs. The idea is to read one page a day for the whole year. And there might be a lesson from yoga philosophy. There might be a yoga posture to practice. There might be a meditation. There might be a journal exercise. So each day there's a different practice. And in addition to being one page a day, which I wanted to do in order to be easy and consistent and accessible to anyone's schedule, because it only takes a few minutes. But the other part of the book is that it's organized into 12 themes, and each of those themes go with the 12 months. So we stay on a theme for about 30 days or so. It's not exact. And then we move on to the next. And they all go in order. So they build on each other. You start with Saucha, which is cleansing, and then the book goes from there.
My guest is Molly Chanson. Her book, Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Molly, please tell our listeners where they can get the book and find out more about you.
My website is mollychanson.com, and the books are available there, and you can find out more about where I am and my yoga teaching, and I'm happy to hear from anyone. And
you also offer an online class, is that correct?
I do. I have an online class called The Practice, and that's all on the website as well.
And we'll be back with more of Molly after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Molly Chanson. Her book, Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Molly, most of us who practice yoga also practice pranayama or breath work, but you also share forms that may not be as familiar. Please tell us about Socha and I'm going to say this wrong, aparigraha.
You said it right.
Thank you.
So, these are the two of the yamas and niyamas, which are the first two of the 8 limbs of yoga. So Saucha is one of the 5 niyamas, which are the 5 observances or rituals. And Saucha means cleansing. And cleansing has to do with physical cleansing, like every morning waking up and washing our face or brushing our teeth, things that we would think of as hygiene. And it also has to do with emotional cleansing or cleansing of our environment. So that would be your space around you. If you have a closet jammed full of stuff and it gives you a lot of stress every time you open the door. And it also can be emotional, meaning, are we full of junk from the past? Do we have regret or resentment or anger or sadness or emotions that we haven't dealt with? So anything not dealt with, we want to cleanse and clear out, and that opens space for what is present today. So that's Saucha. Aparigraha, there are some similarities here, but Aparigraha is one of the 5 yamas, and it means non-attachment or ungrasping. So non-attachment is the practice of, not being defined by our things, or not letting our things define us, rather, is a good way to look at it. So if we're attached to something, it can add this heaviness to us. And then that's where Saucha or cleansing comes in. So we want to try to understand that our physical things or our attachments, maybe it's attachment to an experience or a person, all of these things really are holding us back and keeping us stuck.
And aparigraha, or letting go, might be the most challenging for many of us. What are the secrets of learning to let go?
Well, we don't like change. So, and letting go is always difficult, yes. Accepting that change is inevitable. Yoga teaches that the one thing that's constant is impermanence. So everything is always going to be changing, whether that's ourselves growing, relationships changing, people aging, loss, children growing up. Life is constantly unfolding and changing. So one secret I would say is to not expect that an experience is going to last forever, or that an experience is going to be the same from one time to the next. So an example I use in yoga-wise that's pretty tangible and maybe relatable is I went to a restaurant and I had the most amazing meal I had ever had. And it was delicious. And I just went on and enjoyed every bite. And a month later, I had a friend in town and I said, oh my gosh, we have to go to this restaurant and we have to get this meal and it's amazing and you'll love it. And so we went back and I ordered the same thing and I started eating it. And it was not as enjoyable. It was not as delicious. I don't think anything was wrong with the food, or maybe it was slightly different, but I experienced this profound disappointment in the fact that I had brought my friend along and tried to duplicate this experience that I had had the first time, and it just wasn't the same. And so we can apply this example that's pretty simple to a lot of things where we have a good experience and we attach to that and we want it to be that way forever. And it's just not always going to happen. And then we close ourselves off to the next great experience or the new thing that's going to happen because we're so attached to something that we're afraid if we lose it or it doesn't happen again, that we're never going to feel that way again.
I can relate to that in a different way. In my 30s and 40s, I had put on a lot of weight. And I came to the realization that the weight that I put on was not because I was hungry, but because I was building armor. I was protecting myself from being hurt. And when I came to that realization, I was able to then work on letting it go. That's really tough for a lot of people, isn't it?
It's very tough. Yes, it's very tough. And our experiences are always pointing us to something that we need to acknowledge or learn, or like your example, something that learning something about ourselves so that we can let go is part of that practice of letting go, is to kind of look at things and say, what is this here to teach me?
Absolutely. That's part of recovery too, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
How may our listeners embrace yoga as a healing path?
Yoga is more than a physical exercise practice. So the first thing I would say to embrace yoga as a healing path is that it starts in the body. There is a physical component to yoga, but the 8 limbs, I would say to look at the 8 limbs of yoga. And both of my books are excellent for giving a really accessible overview of the limbs and how they can be applied to life challenges or situations. So yoga is a combination of ethical practices and physical practices and self-awareness practices. And so when you do all of those practices, when it's not just a form of exercise, it does become a healing path.
And in the course of doing the practices, can we focus on specific chakras and allow energy to flow if there's a blockage?
Yes. So when we are tuned into the body, and if you are familiar with the chakras, or it's going to happen anyway, whether you're familiar with the exact teaching or science behind it, but as we are doing a yoga practice, we might notice that there's a certain area of the body that feels tight or stuck or built up. So I've noticed it before in my throat. It can be physical pain, like if there's low back pain. A lot of my clients have low back pain. It can sometimes be something in the gut that just feels a little, you might feel nauseous or just kind of not open in an area. So anytime you sense that there's a block somewhere in the body, and again, that can be something that feels like pain or just discomfort, that is an area of energy that wants to move, is making itself known so that it can be tended to and unstuck.
And give us a couple of examples. For example, you had mentioned if something was, you had an issue with your back. How would you focus the energy to get that energy unstuck?
The best way to focus energy on a certain area of the body is with the breath. So as soon as you could be in a posture, or it could just be while you're seated. But as soon as you start to notice heightened sensation or an uncomfortable sensation in the body, starting to take some deep breaths and focusing your attention on that area of the body is the best way to start to alleviate some of that. So it seems really simple, but the breath really it calms the nervous system, and then it starts to move energy inside our body. And so that's the first thing and the simplest thing to kind of do immediately is to tune into that. And you also might be getting messages at that point of something else that's there. So even though you have pain in your low back and you start to breathe, and you probably have to do this more than one time, but once you start to breathe and focus on that area, you might notice that there's an emotion that comes up, or a message, or some sort of piece of information that you weren't aware of. Like it might be that you actually feel sad about something, or you're angry at someone, or there's some other emotional thing happening. So the body and our emotions are so connected, and yoga creates this thread between the physical body and the emotional body. And so when we can tune into that area and use the breath in order to hold our attention and keep us from being distracted and really focus, there's lots of other things that might come up around that pain or discomfort.
Let's share one more with the listeners. Let's talk about the root chakra and the sense of feeling ungrounded.
Yes. So in my yoga practices, often we start standing or we start seated. And in both cases, it's really important to ground ourselves. And especially if there's some imbalance in the root chakra. So if you're seated in a chair, or you're seated on the floor, or you're standing, to feel that surface beneath you and start with a few breaths right there. So if it's for a lot of people, it's difficult to tune into, where is my root chakra? Where am I supposed to be feeling this? And a really easy way to target that area is through the soles of the feet or through your seat. And so when you're seated or when you're standing, to just breathe and feel that connection with the earth and that surface beneath you if you're sitting or standing. And that's a really great way to tune into that chakra.
What is the yoga of presence?
So when we're present, we're not guided by the past or the future, which means we're not in this experience of perception. Yoga has the intention to point us to what is true. And so as human beings, we are guided by our mind, and the mind is constantly in a state of story. So the mind is always focused on something that happened in the past or something that is going to happen in the future. And the mind has trouble being in a present state of awareness. And this is where a yoga practice, when we're focused on the postures and the body, we're focused on the breath and how that feels moving through our body. That is bringing us to a state of present awareness. And if you've noticed, maybe you've had the experience when you're practicing yoga and you're focusing on your breath and you're trying to move through the postures along with the breath, it's very difficult for you to also be in a narrative or in a story about something. And you might not even know it's happening, but after a while you think, oh, I haven't thought of that thing that's been bothering me for a while, or that thing that I'm worried about. So being present in our yoga practice, and presence is one of the 8 limbs, and it's so essential because we look at everything. Our view is sort of muddied, I say, by our perception. So we can perceive a relationship as good or bad. We have all these labels. We think of ourselves in terms of our roles and our identity. And really all of that takes us away from what is true right now, what is in this moment right now, what is here for me. And so practicing the yoga of presence would be what is happening right now, and can I give myself a little break from my human perception, because it's not always accurate.
Being in the moment.
Yes.
I had a wonderful spiritual teacher who used to share that there should be an 11th commandment: thou shalt have purpose. How may the practices you share in YogaWise help us find or renew our purpose or purposes?
Yes. So Dharma. Dharma is our soul's purpose. And Dharma is not one of the 8 limbs of yoga, but it is in the ancient yogic texts called the Vedas. It's also the focus of the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. And I like what your teacher is saying. When we are seeking our purpose, we're following our energy. So this can be acceptance of a moment. Maybe we get ill, maybe a person we love gets ill, and we have to focus on getting through that illness or caretaking the other person. This could be a career shift. It could be a life event. For me, it was motherhood. Motherhood was a big Dharma moment for me. So Dharma is our purpose. And a lot of times we think of purpose as a vocation or a career, and it certainly can be that. But Dharma and purpose is also what is happening in the moment that needs my energy and my attention. And once we accept that, our sense of purpose brings us contentment, it brings us fulfillment, and this is a way to end our suffering. And yoga is a path with the intention of ending suffering. So the final chapter in YogaWise I dedicated to Dharma, and it's all about what is your soul's purpose? What does this mean? Is it a big deal like it sounds like? And it is and it isn't is the answer. But the final chapter is Dharma, and all the chapters before the 12th chapter lead up to that practice.
And if we transform our Dharma, are we also transforming our karma?
Dharma and karma are similar. So Dharma has to do with choices. So the choices we make are going to affect our Dharma. So I can use my own experience in recovery as an example, but I do believe that being in recovery is part of my Dharma. But I had to make that choice to get sober and do what had to be done and stay in recovery. So our choices affect. Deepak Chopra has this wonderful quote. He says, your choice changes the future. And it's so true. So when we are making these choices and we're focused on, accepting what is happening right now. For me, it was accepting that I was addicted and I had to do something about it. And we make that choice, and that does transform our Dharma. Does that heal our karma in terms of our past lives? I think it definitely heals our future. So I think that making those choices that are in pursuit of our Dharma do heal our future and change ourself, our relationships, and everything ahead of that.
Her new book is entitled Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. We'll be back with more of Molly Chanson after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can, making sure they're safe and comfortable. But it's just as important that you take some time for yourself. At AARP, we can help with information and useful tips on how you can maintain a healthy life balance, care for your own physical and mental well-being, and manage the challenges of caring for a loved one. Because the better care you take of yourself, the better care you can provide for your loved one.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you. You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
We've all felt left out. And for people who move to this country, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Molly Chanson. Her book, Yoga Wise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Molly, how may these practices enable us to rewrite our stories?
When we look at ourselves, we become familiar with our wants, our desires, our longings. This might be a very unfamiliar practice for a lot of us to really tune in and ask ourselves what we want. Often we are doing things for the sake of others, or maybe for validation from someone in our family or someone else, or we're doing something for external validation or for financial gain, or, to kind of heal these parts of ourselves. And we're focused on something external that we think will do that, or just acceptance really can also be one of our motivations. So when we are looking at ourselves and getting familiar with this is what I want, or even just as simple as this is something I like to do, I like to garden, I like to cook. When we stop following some of these external things, like maybe what society wants from us or what others want from us, we tune in and we connect with our own heart through yoga. And when we connect with our own heart and we learn that it's okay to answer that, we are rewriting our story.
You had talked about aparigraha before, or letting go. Is there an aspect of surrender in this? That is, letting go of preconceived notions about ourselves and our self-worth?
Absolutely. So letting go can be letting go of roles or identity that we believe define us. And this is a big one. This was a big one for me, allowing someone else to define who we are, or allowing an experience to define us. Something can happen that appears to be bad or really is tragic. People talk to us and things are done to us, especially when it comes to abuse or trauma, that are out of our control. And we can allow these things to define who we are. And of course, we need to do the healing and work to move through those things. But letting go of this idea that an experience or a person defines us at all, or that we're defined even by our job. We could lose our job and think, without this job, who am I? Or without this marriage, who am I? And so when we experience loss in our life, it's really hard to let go because we have an attachment to that person or that thing or that career as being a defining part of who we are. And that's where rewriting our story and letting go and surrender all come in.
How may all of these practices lead us to personal satya, or truth?
Personal satya is permission to be who we are. So it does have to do with letting go, regardless of others' validation, regardless of outcome, regardless of what something looks like on the outside. As long as you're answering your own personal truth and using that as your guide, I would say that's the ultimate path to feeling fulfilled and content truly from within.
And letting go of the myth that we've created about ourselves.
Yes. So that's a story. So often in yoga wise, the chapter on rewriting stories is all about what are the stories that I have about myself, and always kind of observing those as they can change. So a story we had about ourselves last year might be different this year. We don't have to keep holding on to these same stories all the time. And so it's beneficial to always kind of check those stories and look at them and say, is this true today?
So the big question is, unconditional love, especially for self, achievable?
Yes, a big and a great question. I have not figured out how to get rid of my critical voice. So as much progress as I think I have made, I think that critical voice in our heads is kind of part of how our mind works and probably part of being human. But through yoga, I am now able to practice more self-compassion, and I'm able to practice discernment. So knowing that my mind is functioning this way, knowing that critical voice may or may not be true, just kind of being aware of when it comes up. So, an example, like if we're driving and we accidentally cut someone off or do something we're not supposed to be doing or something we feel bad about, right away for me, when I make a mistake, that voice comes up and it's just like telling me all these things about myself. And being aware of that voice and that that's happening is the first step to this practice of unconditional love for ourselves, that we're allowed to make mistakes. It doesn't make us a bad person. We're going to make mistakes, and we can come back from those without letting it define the rest of our day or the rest of our life if it's a bigger mistake.
The yoga of forgiveness.
Yes.
Self-forgiveness.
Self-forgiveness is a really big one. Yes.
Absolutely. And how may these practices promote unity of body, mind, and spirit?
You brought up satya, the practice of truth, and this is a great way to think about yoga or yoke, to yoke, which is the Sanskrit translation of yoga. And so when we're thinking about linking mind, body, and spirit, we're not being governed by the mind alone. And we've been talking about this, but the mind in story, or the mind creating a thought, and then we cling to that thought, we go to it, we go to the story, we have a whole narrative, and then we're kind of just lost in this narrative mind or this story. And like I said earlier, it may or may not be true. So using the breath and becoming present, that step of, am I in story? Am I in the past? Am I in the future? Or am I present? And a practice to be present is to start to watch the breath. So taking a few breaths, that advice of like, if you're stressed, take a deep breath, it's true and it does work. When we start to notice our breath, when we start to breathe a little more deeply, and we experience the breath as air entering the nose, moving through the body, we're present. And when we're present and in the breath, we're not in this story. So in this way, the mind, body, and spirit are all kind of working together, because we can be noticing the mind making thoughts. We can choose not to run with that thought. We can choose not to get lost in the story. We're just watching the mind behave as it does. We're coming into presence. We're bringing our attention back to the breath. Okay, the mind is making a thought. I'm going to take another breath and notice my breath. And then in doing that through presence, the 8 limbs teach that once we get present first, and then we continue our focus on the breath. And then with presence and focus, we're able to enter a state of meditation. And when we're meditating, we're opening ourselves up to spirit or higher guidance or our higher self.
So we truly are yoga, or yoking together body, mind, and spirit.
Yes.
There are many forms of pranayama. I loved alternate nostril breathing. What's your favorite?
Oh, I love alternate nostril breathing. I love alternate nostril breathing. It's my go-to. And I learned another one when I was at my pranayama training at Kripalu. And that is alternate nostril breathing with a little pause at the top. And so it's sort of like alternate nostril breathing, but I call it like a step up. And so if you want to try it, you do the same practice, alternate nostril breathing, but at the top of the inhale, just a little beat or a little pause before exhaling. And for some reason, it just feels really calming to me.
And I can't remember the Sanskrit name, but we also practiced bellows breath.
Yes, Bastrika.
Where the stomach is expanded as you inhale?
Yes.
That was a lot of fun too. That helped you to calm down.
It does help you to calm down. And that's a place where I think I probably was holding and tightening in my stomach. Maybe we do it all the time. Maybe as a woman, maybe it doesn't matter, but the permission to just let my belly go with the breath, I love it.
Absolutely. What would you like readers to take away from Yoga Wise, 365 days of yoga-inspired teachings to transform your life?
I would love people to understand that yoga is a life practice. Yoga is not a posture practice or a form of exercise. Of course, those things are beneficial. And I think no matter what brings you to yoga, for me, it was I wanted a way to exercise, but I didn't want to run. I think no matter what brings you to your mat, to answer that, and then to be open and curious about what else is there, because there are many other aspects of yoga besides the physical practice, and you're still practicing yoga. So I always tell my students and my readers that if you have an injury or you have a limitation in your physical body, people come to me and they can't be on their knees, or they can't sit down and stand up and move around. And then they think yoga is not accessible to them, or yoga isn't a practice that they can do. And it's not true. So yoga is something for everyone. It doesn't matter if you've never done yoga before, how old you are, your religion, any belief system you follow. Yoga is a practice that is available to anyone. And it's something that you can weave into your life regardless of where you're at. So let go of that story that maybe yoga isn't for you.
What's next for Molly Chanson?
Right now, I'm doing many yoga and book events with the launch of YogaWise. So that's taking up a lot of my time. I do have a full-time job during the week. And I have two boys who are going to be in 7th and 8th grade. And then it's on to high school. So I have a lot of energy in my household, and I'm following that energy. I do have plans to write another book. I'm going to let myself be guided and open to when that time is right. But right now I'm enjoying watching YogaWise on this path and following that.
Her name is Molly Chanson. Her book is called YogaWise, 365 Days of Yoga-Inspired Teachings to Transform Your Life. Molly, please tell our listeners one more time where they can find your book and more about you.
If you go to mollychanson.com, you will find my book and my yoga practices and my email to contact me anytime.
And also you offer a class online.
I also offer a class online called The Practice, and that is also at mollychanson.com.
Molly, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your path, your wisdom, and especially your open-hearted love.
Thank you, Victor, so much. I've enjoyed it.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.